Peter Himmelman is a Grammy and Emmy Award nominated rock and roll performer, songwriter, film composer, visual artist, and award winning author. He has been profiled in Time Magazine, Rolling Stone, The Wall Street Journal, and NPR. Founded in 2011, his company Big Muse has worked with organizations like the Wharton School, Coca-Cola, and the United States Army War College to help leaders become more resilient, more trusting, and more willing to manifest their authentic selves. Peter's latest book is Suspended by No String, a songwriter's reflections on faith, aliveness, and wonder, and his new album is At the Emergence of Stars. Nadine Epstein is an award winning journalist and author. She has been the editor in chief and CEO of Moment Magazine since 2004 and is the founder and executive director of the Center for Creative Change. Nadine is also an artist and has kept drawing journals and is a shadow photographer. She has taught creativity workshops and creative writing classes. Nadine writes fiction and poetry, and her most recent book is RBG's Brave and Brilliant Women 33 Jewish Women to Inspire Everyone, which she wrote in collaboration with the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Please welcome Peter Himmelman and Nadine Epstein.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hello, Peter.
Nadine, I didn't know you had all these other accomplishments. I'm like, now I got nervous after I heard that.
Oh, I don't think so. Really.
I thought I was just talking to a wonderful, intelligent, successful, Jewish woman, and now I hear even more. It's stacked on. It's great.
I think you know more than you let on, because you and I met many years ago through Judeo Pearl. And there were a few years when I would come to Santa Monica long ago, and we'd go for long walks. And you and I would get lost in conversations that would really make the physical aspects of wherever we were walking completely vanish. And I remember when I first met you, I was so excited to meet you because I hadn't heard your music, but I had seen your drawings. And I'm an artist, and I draw, and I recognized your creativity through your art. And in fact, I had never heard your music, and again, this is so long ago, you might not remember, but you invited me, my brother, and my nephew, who maybe was 7 years old or 6 years old. And we came to your studio and heard you and your band, the band you had at that time, play. So that was my first introduction to your music, was in your studio, which is, I think, where you are today.
It's the same space. It changed a little bit, as we've all changed. It's just gotten better and better and more youthful, the studio, and one wish I had, but, what can I say?
Well, I thought, because you're sitting there with your mic, and I can see your guitar there to your left, or to your right, actually, if you would start us out with a song.
Yeah, I think we're just going over a few things, and randomly, because I have all these pages in front of me. This is a song from the new record, which I wrote, 7 years ago or something. I went into the studio with about 50 different songs to choose from and pick 10 or 12 or whatever it was. And this is one I didn't think I would record. And I have this guy who produces with me, and his name is Sheldon Gomberg. And he says, "What about this song, Eastbound Machine?" I said, "Do you like that one? It's just sort of like simple." He goes, "It's a beautiful song." And it's so beautiful to me, and I'm not bragging about my song. Some things you see that make you cry sometimes. And the reason it makes me cry is it makes me think of my kids and my family. And it's sort of, in a vague sense, alluding to all that in this song. I'll try to play as much as I can of it. Eastbound machine, the day goes by unseen, with every expectation breaking down. Eastbound machine, the space is in between the fading lighting, the frozen ground. We are traveling together to see the good that is in store. Sail away to be united, to be connected evermore. Eastbound machine, ever hallowed, ever clean, speeding past the broken winter fields. Eastbound machine, no more secrets left to glean. Every purpose is revealed. We are traveling together to see the good that is in store. Sail away to be united, to be connected evermore. Eastbound. Eastbound machine, burning hope and gasoline, reaping more than we've ever sown. Eastbound machine, we're only human beings, feeling more than we've ever known. Traveling together to see the good that is in store. Sail away to be united, to be connected evermore. Eastbound.
Thank you. I actually sat down last night and read your book, which I have here, and everyone can see all the little yellow stickies of all the places that I thought were really exciting for me. Everybody's going to read it and find different exciting moments in it. But before we get to it, I also just have to ask you about the paintings behind you, because you're surrounded by art, and this is your own art. Could you introduce us to one or two of the paintings?
Well, yeah, I used to only draw. This is a funny thing. Maybe this is apropos of where we might go when we get into the large subject of creativity, divinity.
Yes.
I can't paint. I can only draw.
Well, so speak right into that mic and tell us. I know you can't go away and show us.
This mic is very directional, so
yes.
I'll take you back here a little bit. I can't paint, and this is something I've thought about for years.
So you're drawing your paintings.
And the reason I couldn't paint is very simple. I actually never tried using a brush. And I started it, and I'm using the brush for different kinds of paintings. This one is called, for no good reason, Brothers. And I found that rather than the brush being a hindrance, it became the greatest sort of liberating tool. I mean, I could make big lines and small lines, and what's another one here? This one, which I painted on cardboard because I didn't have any canvas, and I thought, I just feel like I need to paint something, so I'm going to go into the alley and find some cardboard, which was not hard to find.
Which is a great way to be creative. It's just you paint with what you find.
Yeah, you have, I often say when people say, well, we don't have the band, I can't play it acoustically. Just think about Picasso. If he only had a piece of charcoal, would he be saying, well, I don't really have my paints with me? Of course not. He'd draw with a potato if he had to. And that's maybe the point. And there's something probably beautiful about a potato painting, which I have never
I
tried. And
love potato painting. So
you know,
I
like
have
you,
potato paintings that I did with my son years ago, and I still keep the potato paintings.
now I'm thinking about a potato with no ink or paint, just the juice
Oh.
of the potato. No,
Oh,
I'm
I
not
was
really.
using
That
potato
doesn't
with,
seem like it
yeah.
would be very colorful. This is another sort of.
That's cool. Very
Here's
cool.
another thing. When I am writing, I know a lot of
Mm.
writers and screenwriters, they always have music playing in the
Mhm.
background. If I have music playing in the background when I write, I will become so confused. It is the worst thing for me because I get so
Mhm.
caught up in the music. But when I'm painting, having music on, whether it's, jazz or just very gritty blues, or
Mhm.
he's just listening to a Mahler symphony in C sharp minor, which is sounded so modern, and it really helps me paint. It's almost it's very physical with the brush. I'm kind of
Mhm.
doing things that I would not normally do, just moving my body in certain ways. I also have giant paintings which I can't lift at this point.
Well, so like I said, I sat down and read your book last night, and I just wanted to start with the title, Suspended by No String. And I thought you might tell us the story behind the title and what that means to you.
Well, I could probably make up a better story right now in retrospect. Uh, Sometimes these titles and things and snippets, they're sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, trans intellectual. They're not. I'm not thinking about things as I would when I'm reading how do I put together this piece of IKEA, furniture that's breaking in my hands.
Hmm.
It's sort of like and I'm going to speak aspirationally because normally I'm not always thinking in these terms, so don't get me wrong. Usually I'm just a guy making eggs. But I have on more than one occasion sort of found myself in like a liminal dream, like you're in between waking and dreaming. I
Hmm.
can kind of put myself in that state. If my wife sees me in that, she would not like it. It's a very bad way to have a conversation with somebody. But things, and when I say things come to me, I want to make this a level playing field here. Things come to everybody, everyone. And some people, well, I'm not creative. I hear that all the time, and it doesn't bother me, but it makes me feel that I have to address that. First of all, everyone dreams at night. There's professional people who speak like this, and they may be actuaries, and they may be selling real estate, and they may have a tie, and they don't have this like sad little goatee, which my wife's friend calls a little cry for help. They may not have the accoutrement of the creative type, but everyone's dreaming at night of the craziest things, the weirdest, most beautiful, most horrible things. Everyone is an artist. The difference is a lot of people are afraid of just delving into some of that stuff in their waking hours. And I love to lead people into that space and finding somebody who had formerly said, I'm not really creative. And after we go through some experience where they're writing a song or something, they say, well, I see what you mean. I see if this were a larger part of my life, even 5 minutes a day, or even 30 seconds a day, or even 15 seconds or 5 seconds a day.
Well,
Creativity is almost
that's what a creative life is. A creative life is a life where you make the time to listen and make the time to remember your dreams and make the
right.
time to act on your dreams and make the time to, and that's the that's the blessings of a creative life. That is
And
the,
if you, I guess the difference is, and it doesn't have anything to do with creativity or somebody's ability, but if somehow you willed yourself into a situation, I won't even call it courage or confidence or anything like that, where you simply had this inseparable desire, you couldn't move yourself from it to create, and then at some point you started to get paid for it, which is also a very dangerous thing for creativity. It's one of the,
yeah.
but you just had to do it, and you found yourself in a place where you could just do that. It's very fortunate. But anyone can put themselves into that position, whether they're cooking or having a discussion with a loved one or even playing with a child.
The most wonderful thing about having a grandchild is having a creative play companion.
Yeah, that's right.
Actually, I have to say, since I have a grandchild now too.
We're in the same club. We
We're
got quite
same.
the gaggle of them spread around the
Yeah.
country now. It's
So
nice, yeah.
when did you know, like you, you're somebody who, from looking at reading your book, knew at an early age that you needed to live a creative life. I think a lot of people may know that, but not do it. And when did you decide that you just had to live a creative life?
Well, as probably all your questions are and will be, that's a good one. I'm going to sit
Mhm.
and think about that. I have no pat answer for it.
I don't want any pat answers
Yeah.
anyway,
I'm
so
thinking that uh, I'm thinking about how to address that. I don't know that I feel it now. Like I'm embarrassed to say I'm a creative person. It's somehow it sounds treacly to me.
mm,
I mean, as I look back on my childhood, which I remember very well, I was always doing weird stuff. And I was always drawing. And the reason that I drew was that I was bored and I could create a world. My world was called Glurchville. And there were like little dinosaur like things. And I remember I would play, cops and robbers, and there would be a jail, and I would I would play. I don't know if you ever read Winnicott's work. He
mm,
was a psychologist and he worked a lot with children. And he wrote a lot about what is that state, that fearless state when children play, where they're completely engrossed by what they're doing. They can't even hear what's going on around them. And I say to my daughter, who was an art history major at Barnard, and I say, Ezra's Winnicott, isn't he? She goes, yeah, he is. He's just deep into it. And every kid is like that until somebody says, pay attention, quit fading off, listen to me. And they get castigated for going into that place. And then it's over. And it's over for almost forever unless somebody toes them out. It's so easy to break a child. So
yeah.
easy to like put a little notch on the sapling and then turn into this horrible scar as the tree grows.
But there's a place where there's a time when that there's a zone. I think at one time, I can't pronounce his name, Mikhail, was a whole book about
Yeah, nobody can
flow,
pronounce his name. The flow
flow zones.
state
But like
guy.
when I
Yeah.
read that book, I was like, well, of course I've been living in that's the state that I've been in so often in my life. And it's true, it makes it hard to pay attention to some of the other things you're supposed to be paying attention to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah.
I find even in the last, I don't know, we want to get down this road or anything, but since October 7, everything changed for me or accelerated or became more excited, and not necessarily in a happy zone, but I've always loved to create, and it was sort of like it's just the stuff that I do. But made me feel the sands of the hourglass were going down. And even if, God willing, we all live to 120, it's not a long time. And the preciousness of time and being cognizant of it was extremely, and has been extremely motivating to me in recent times.
But I guess I've always thought about time, and time is so short, and we just completely forget that. And then we have these reminders, and October 7th being one of those reminders, but there's just, death is always a reminder of that.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I don't think that it's necessarily morbid to talk about mortality.
no, I think I always, as a kid, would say to my mother, and she thought I was nuts, death is what motivates us.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, if there were no, the portrait of Dorian Gray, I mean, there's no tension. It is,
yeah,
the more you think about it, I mean, it's a dangerous route because you can become very depressed, but as a
yes.
motivating force, the scarcity of any kind, you only have 6 strings on the guitar, you don't have infinite strings. Everything is, in creativity, is limited in some way, which sounds paradoxical.
Although it doesn't feel limited. But let me switch to something else, because I want to talk about your book a little bit
Shift
and
that gear.
shift that gear. Yes. So let's talk about faith. So let's talk about faith and creativity and how the two intersect for you.
Well, again, the word faith is an English word.
Okay.
And English was not meant, I don't think, to speak about spiritual matters as well, let's say, as Hebrew does. And the word faith is very nebulous in English context. I have faith in this, artist to make it to the top of the charts. I have faith in, faith to me can be circumscribed down to what it really means. I have faith that God, who is creating the world, and God, the creator with a capital C at every moment, I work at least, or I aspire or endeavor to have faith in a world that seems to abut faith and push faith out of the picture all the time. We're physical beings, and there's a great tension there. How can you believe in something that you can't see? Especially when I grew up, and maybe you grew up in a similar milieu, where if I were to talk about God in my house growing up, I'm pretty sure that my mom would have sought therapy for me. In my synagogue, really anyone that talked about actual belief in God, a certain, or working on an awareness of God, which you can never be completely aware of or even partially aware of because it's the infinite. Nobody spoke about that. And it was difficult for me because it seemed so obvious, and I felt lonely in being with people who weren't conversant in the idea of faith in God.
Well, I had very similar experiences, and I wanted people to talk about whether God existed or not. No one wanted to talk about whether God existed or not with me. Just either way, really. And I remember being like in 5th or 6th grade and trying to start a club to discuss whether God existed or not. And everyone thought I was completely nuts, which
Well, nobody's got the time for that because, we got to
in
make
5th or
the
6th grade,
appointment.
certainly not,
No, you
apparently.
got to go to soccer practice, and there's more
Oh no,
practical
this was a
things.
different era. We weren't as busy, but we certainly didn't have, no one was interested in discussing this topic with me for many, many years. Um, but so let's talk about, I know as artists, we're always questioning all words, and I use the word faith, and I know we can talk a little bit about, I know from talking to you other times that you have the word spirituality also bothers you. So let's talk about a little bit before we even get into how faith connects to God connects to creativity. Let's talk about why you don't really like the word spirituality
Well, I mean,
any
this
more
is
than
not
you
that I
like the
don't,
word faith.
right? It's not that I have any personal grudge against those words. They're lovely words, and I use them all the time. But I think they can be explored more than they are. And I like to kind of open things up and crack them open and play the devil's advocate against myself sometimes. But it's often used, I think, as I've observed. By the way, nothing I'm saying on this entire podcast is going to be data driven. There is no data that drives anything that I say or do. So know that for a start. These are just my ideas. They have no factual basis, generally speaking. But people say, well, I'm spiritual. And it's kind of a good way to say I'm not religious in a kind of in the way that we think about religion. And it's important to, not that we're getting into etymology here, but there's no word for religion in Hebrew. And there's a good reason for that. There isn't a place in life, and then we can easily slide into creativity if you want from this little riff, but there's not a place in life, at least from what I know of Judaism, and this is probably why I'm so attracted to it, other than the fact that I feel and always have felt very Jewish, that's exempt from religion. It isn't like the headphones and I'm doing my music and now it's time for prayer. Everything is interrelated. That's why the Shema is about God is one, and it doesn't mean one as opposed to 40 or 20 or 207. It talks and speaks of an entire ineffable, absolutely impossible to conceive of oneness. So that everything that we see and touch and do is part of this organic religion thing. Now, if you divest all this from the idea of there being a creator, however one imagines it, and if you do imagine it, get rid of your imagination because it's not going to be correct. Keep changing it if you must. Devoid of that, these words have a very condensed, sort of attenuated meaning. So that's how I feel about spirituality. Sometimes
Well, tell me how you feel about, let's talk about God in your life. And let's talk about, I know you've evolved into a level of observance that you should tell us something about. I'd like you to tell us something about, and how that connects to your existence as an artist.
Well, I mean, on a very practical or sort of technical level, I only keep kosher. I only eat at kosher restaurants. I pray 3 times a day. I put on tefillin. I'm wearing a talis katan under my sweatshirt right now. I don't work on Shabbat. All those things that everyone's probably heard about. I didn't start out that way, and if I had, I probably would have blown it off. I couldn't stand all the rules unless I chose them for myself at an older age, and I started choosing this through amazing circumstances, some of which are written about in the book. But my dad had died. He got a very horrible diagnosis when I was 17. The prognosis was that he would live a few months. He lived for 4 years. And that whole thing, which was so tragic to me, just because, not only because he was my father, but anyone that knows him knew that he was a kind of person who was very rare. First of all, he was a Jewish Marine. I used to see on rare occasions, wasn't all the time, at some guy on the street like pushing around his girlfriend. And my dad would come up to him and throw him against the wall. Or someone said, some anti-Jewish thing, and that guy would go up against the wall and he would ass if needed, which I loved. And he was also self-effacing and funny. And all my cousins and friends would gather around him. Why? And this leads into some other aspect of creativity. Not because he had such great advice, maybe he did or didn't, but by his mere presence, by dint of his being there, by his humanity, people left him feeling like whatever it was that they wanted desperately to do that was good, that they could better do it now, that they had a better grasp on it. He pushed away people's fears. And when he died, that's what was so tragic. And when he died, I realized all this Jewish stuff that I'd learned and heard about and sort of thought about all the time, it started making sense. It sort of fell into place, and the Hebrew that I'd learned started to make sense. And all the times we'd been to Israel, everything started to make sense for me. And I found something that was very essential about me.
And you write in the book a few times about structure and how being an artist and someone who allows himself to explore beyond words, beyond places where many people go, how structure is so important. And how does the structure of your observance free you as an artist?
I think the analogy is really perfect. I mean, I talk about this to my musician friends, who are not Jewish at all. One guy's got like neck tattoos, and other guys from south side of Chicago, and they understand this so easily. This idea that all the skills and all the acumen they have, it can't really come from themselves. The best musicians all know this. A guy sits down on the drum throne, and I watch him, and he's got this sort of impervious, invulnerable, almost arrogant sense. When he touches the sticks, he's intimate with them. But he also has this humility, this vulnerability, whereby he knows where his gifts are coming from, and she knows where they're coming from. And I already know how this player is going to be able to listen and to play. And the structure that he or she had to learn over many, many years was like the foundation of a house. A house cannot be built in a swamp. And for me, to close the circle on what your question was, whereby my music and my art and my writing, everything is dependent on structure. Without it, it would be just this useless blob. So does Judaism, in my mind, and it's not for anyone else, I'm not selling this, just for me, it's a foundation upon which I build an entire life. In other words, my artwork is only a fraction, a homeopathic dose of the artwork of my life. And I think everyone's life is a work of art, however beautiful or tragic or wonderful it is. We make our art on the canvas of our lives.
Thank you. You said something important happened there. Thank you. I wanna switch topics a little bit to something else you talk about in the book. And that's that we're all just skimming knowledge. I love the expression skimming knowledge. I think a lot about how I talk to so many people, and people are so certain about what they know. And I'm often just thinking, well, how do you know that? How do I know that? And how do any of us know this? And it's pretty important because we live in a world where there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and I'm adding a new term, different information. And knowing something even knowing something on a superficial level is quite a task now. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your thoughts about certainty.
Well, in terms of, let's say, we'll use art as an ongoing metaphor here, if we may. One thing that happened to me, I was doing a lot of scoring for film and television. There's a couple of shows that I worked on. One was called Judging Amy, and one was called Bones. And I remember it was so fast. It was so difficult. You have to work so fast. You know, sometimes the shows would need to be done 35 completely finished music cues in like 48 to 72 hours. And then I got everything down to sort of like a rhythm. And it was like, yeah, and I found my palette of sounds. And at that moment, and I liken this to mastery, and I'm going to compare this and then go into the certitude thing. But at that moment, the job became horrible for me. It ceased to be creative. And it was like pumping out widgets. Now, granted, I'm glad I did them because it was very lucrative and I learned a lot from the experience. But I did recognize that I had so many signals coming out that there wasn't anything coming in. And I would just I would be lost in the music because I wasn't controlling it. This pattern that I had set up was the controlling device. And whenever you feel that you've mastered something, that is a moment of danger for anyone, a spouse, a parent. When I got this down, or a penitent, or a person who prays. Once you have it to a rote thing that you think wrongly that you understand, then you're getting yourself into this quagmire of knowing too much. Now, there are certain things we do need to know. Science, we have these signs in Santa Monica. Science is real. Like, yeah, did you need to put that on your lawn? I get it. Physics is basically real. But the idea that we can know, and I think we spoke about this, something about water. And this I'll use as an example of this knowing. Well, we know what water is. I mean, what's water? Everyone will say it's H2O. It's this kind of liquid stuff, and it's clear generally, and unless it's frozen, it's liquid. It's H2O. That's 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. And unlike children who love to play with water until they get bored of it, until they're, told not to play with it because it's too messy and everyone gets wet, they have a fascination with water because they have no idea what it is. And when we think that we know what it is because someone told us it was H2O, which just is a part of a constituent of knowing, but when we think it's the totality of knowing about water, and we've lost our childlike relationship to it, then we are in a static place, which is anathema to creativity and to life itself.
So I think in the book, and from knowing you and talking to you, that wonder is always the antidote. To remember wonder throughout,
Yeah.
like every day, to remember. I mean, and that's part of your observance too, 3 times a day. It's the taking a moment to wonder. But all of us need to wonder at, really as much as possible during the day to find time to
I
wonder.
want to make that easier because I pray, I daven 3 times a day. And to be perfectly candid, it's not going to, help me if I ever want to take a job as a cleric. But I probably get a sense of wonder about 0.001% of the time. And it's obviously not most of the time. It's a tiniest fragment of time, if even that. But the accumulation of those tiny fragments, like tiny mosaics that build out over time, create a whole life of wonder for you. So if one is interested in this kind of thing and they think, well, I'm not all of a sudden become like these, like weird new age people, just look up at the sky for 5 seconds in the morning before you get in your car and just say to yourself, what the hell is that blue thing? And that's enough. And then you can go put on your talk radio or whatever it is you're listening to.
I don't
But
think it has
that'll
anything to do
help.
with New Age. I think New Age is
Yeah,
it's
right.
just
I'm saying it.
wonder predates. I mean, New Age is one manifestation
Right,
and one kind of
exactly.
language about wonder, but wonder is built into so much. And I know when your book first arrived on our book editor's desk, and she peeked into it, and she came to me and said, wow, there's, I'd never thought about, there was a part of me read that book. She's about sunsets and how sunsets could be thought of as the proof of existence of God.
Hmm.
And, she was so excited. And for me, sunsets are incredibly sacred times of the day. And tell us a tiny bit about your perception of sunsets.
Well, first of all, I did put the word wonder in my subtitle too, because it's an important word to me.
Oh, yes. A songwriter's reflections on faith, aliveness, and wonder.
Right. I mean, I guess sometimes my wife and I'll, we live in Santa Monica, so we live probably about a 40-minute walk from the Bluffs, which overlook the largest body of water on Earth. And we don't go there quite often enough, but when we do, we go around eventide, as I like to say, and you see the sun, receding behind the mountains and a little bit north in Malibu, and there are crowds of people that are just gaping at that, and their wonder, at least for that moment, is revitalized. And because I'm sort of a devil's advocate type person, I often then wonder, why aren't we amazed when the sun is just high in the sky? There's a certain beauty to the red sun going down for sure, but because it's more rare, we see it as more beautiful, as more precious. It also has a bit of scarcity to it and a bit of constriction. If it were always glowing red in the sky and the sun never set or rose, we wouldn't think much of it, just like we don't think much of water or the fact that we can breathe or the fact that we have loved ones. So
And there
much
was
that's
fear built in too for many. I mean, now we have lights at night and we have, but sunset, just like the solstice, were times where people were about to enter a period of darkness
right.
that was a darkness that could not be changed.
This fallow period, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Couldn't
it's
hop
dark
on a
here.
jet and go to Costa Rica. Couldn't go in your house, turn on the light and watch, Netflix. There's so much that we couldn't do, and some of these things I still don't do. Like I can't. I have a hard time watching screens at
Right, more
night.
screens. I mean, you're right
Yeah.
about the darkness that was there. There was a great book, I forget the title of it, was something like A World Before Light or something like that. And it talked about how dark it was in these homes before there was electricity, where they would read by the light, and they would say, if you turned on your refrigerator light, your tiny little bulb, that's how it looked in your entire kitchen
Mm.
when the sun went down, and how people read by candlelight. And
The
you're right, when
refrigerators
the
have even changed. Now there's lights on the outside of refrigerators and
lights
LEDs,
are
and
everywhere,
the lights are
flashing.
everywhere.
Right.
Yeah. Um, I wanted you to pick one place in your book, one small. Your book is the book is easy to read. It's written in little sections. It's like a memoir, although there is a memoirishness to it because you
Yeah,
actually get to know Peter
there's.
and some of the stories of his life. But there's much else in it too. But if you had to pick a one small section to read to us, because
Let me go over here
I
because I.
also what we're going to do some more music.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I again went through it and picked all these parts of it
Oh yeah, anything that you
that
thought.
spoke to me. And and actually one of the most powerful parts, of course, is going to bring us into Danny Pearl, which is
Mm,
how we actually connected.
right. Now this is a little bit of a strange one that I like a lot. It has a little bit to do, or maybe a lot to do, with this idea of not knowing, of thrusting ourselves into this strange place where what is familiar to us suddenly becomes, and delightfully so, unfamiliar. It's called We See the Bird. Nothing special happened this morning, at least not anything I can easily point to. I was standing in front of the mirror putting toothpaste on my toothbrush, but for a second, maybe less, I had the stark and sudden realization that I was alive, and that at some point I will no longer be alive. There was no intellectualizing, no, wow, you're squeezing out toothpaste, isn't that magical? It was more like I'd seen a strange bird fly by. When a strange bird flies by, we don't achieve any sort of insight. We see the bird and then it vanishes. We retain a certain feeling, but we have no control over the bird. All day long, I couldn't stop thinking that one thought.
And then there's the drawing, because the book is
Yeah,
filled with drawings. I'm going to see if I can bring it up there with Peter
yeah.
drawings.
There's like I don't know, it's 160 drawings or some there. My editor friend told me if you're going to make one drawing, you probably should make one for every piece. And I think they do a good job for me of taking some of the pieces that are very sad and sort of lightening them. I'll pick out one sort of tiny piece that doesn't seem to be very important, and I might have drawn that. And some of the pieces that are lighter almost feel a little deeper from these drawings.
Because there's a section of the book which are some of the darkness that feeds creativity, that darkness that all of us have, and some of the stories of your life, especially your sister
Yeah, I
that
mean,
you
there's
who
one
you
piece
lost.
I could read here if you have time. I don't know how much time we have in this.
How is it short? Because I have, how long is it? Is it short? What page is it?
It's pretty short. You tell me if it's good. It's 95.
Well, I'm sure it's good. That's not the
If it's
question. Hold
short,
on.
you know,
Oh, please read. Go ahead. Read it. Yes.
this has more to do about, again, about we find things are very rational and we just take it for granted that we know them again. Now, my sister died tragically in a car accident. I guess it was almost 30 years ago now. I was in Israel with my family and got the news over the phone, which is not a great way to get it. Another tragic thing. This one is called rational. There is nothing rational about insisting that the universe functions on rationality. For example, I've just woken up after having dreamed that Susie, whose death occurred almost 25 years ago, had been asleep in a hidden cellar that was 3 levels below the basement of our childhood home. There is little rationality about my waking from the dream with my heart pounding and my sense of loss acutely recollected, not to mention the irrationality of the 6 various colored pigeons that have suddenly alighted on the ledge of my window. Rationality is the brush of gray paint we apply to a world whose colors are so vivid, whose dimensions are so vast, and whose essence is so far beyond our ken, that without that palette overlay, we would surely lose our minds.
And here's the drawing that goes with that, right there. Because I love the drawings. Well, I want to talk about, another great moment of tragedy for a dear friend of ours, Judea Pearl, who lost his son maybe almost 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. I've lost track.
It's about like almost 23 years.
23 years. And whose parents really never recovered completely. And we met through Judea. And I wanted to tell us, I was, always heard the story that Danny, who I never met, by the way, but we actually have a project named for him called the Daniel Pearl Investigative Journalism Initiative here at Moment. And I became very close to his parents and still very close to his dad, but his mom having passed away. But I wanted to tell, I always knew that you had this, he loved your music, but then you really tell the story in your book in a way that I didn't know all the details, and how he was somebody that you really looked up to, who you actually felt like inferior to on some level deeply inside. Tell us the story of this.
Well, very, very broadly, I not only looked up to him, I literally fell in love with him, and I never knowingly met him. So I was doing a lot of TV and film work, and probably in that zone that I was talking to you about, where I had it all down to a routine, and I was feeling just kind of hollowed out inside. And I wondered during that time, because I still kept making records and playing shows and things, why nobody from the Danny Pearl Foundation ever called me to play. Like, I wish they would know who I was. And I just felt like, well, I guess it's not for me. And Danny Pearl, he went to Stanford. I never went to college. I mean, what would we have in common, and why would he ever care about me? He was writing these beautiful, life-affirming stories for the Wall Street Journal. I'm here making basically, little pieces of music for some of the shows are like soft-core porn that were just kind of titillating, supposedly funny things. And I was at my desk one day, and there was some people working in the office in the studio with me, and I get this email. I was taking a break because I used to work long hours, and somebody says, well, I've seen this piece in a magazine. He forwarded it to me. It was Bloomberg.com, a link. I never read that magazine. He says, I think you'll find this really interesting, Peter. And I open it up, it already was interesting. It was about Pakistan and the ISI. The title, I think, of the piece was Macallan's Scotch and something like that. I don't remember what it was. And I just reading it, and it's about that's where Danny Pearl died. I'm like, I am interested in this. And all of a sudden, I get to this little part where the writer, whose name is William Pesek, I got to know him later, he says, Danny Pearl and I were friends, and already, oh my God, somebody was friends with this, my idol, really. And we didn't go to each other's birthday parties. It wasn't that kind of friendship. We mostly shared Macallan's Scotch and the music of this person you may never have heard of, named Peter Himmelman. We once even went to see him at a show at the 930 Club in Washington, D.C., and I was literally crying at my desk. It was, even now, the moment was so profound, and I wrote back to this William Pesek, And he wrote me back in 15 minutes. He goes, yeah, you were one of Danny's favorite artists. And I even used one of your songs at my wedding, he said. And I asked him, do you know Judea Pearl? He just, I don't know him, but I have his email. And I wrote to Judea and, copy and pasted the article so he wouldn't think I was nuts. And it was Friday morning, so after Shabbos, then it was Sunday morning, I went to the Pearl's house and we talked, and it got really deep, and, I fell in love with his parents, and that sort of began this long friendship. And, I pray for a lot of people every day, a lot of people that are sick. I have this ever burgeoning list, and it takes me a long time, and people in my family, and there's people that have passed away that I pray for their souls, their neshamas, and I pray for Danny Pearl every day in some strange way. And of course, this is beyond the bounds of empiricism. I feel in some way that we still have a connection, even though I'm in the temporal world and he's in a world of something else.
Well, I know he had a few favorite songs, and we picked one earlier that you could begin to sing us out on, and I'll come back after briefly, but I would love to hear that. And tell us the name of the song, please.
The name is, I guess this was a song that Danny liked a lot. It's called Impermanent Things. It's on it was on my first record on Sony, and the record was called From Strength to Strength. And I'll play as best I can. This song is called Impermanent Things. Maybe you'll see its connection to some of the things we've been talking about just now. All these impermanent things, oh, how they fool me, dominate and rule me. They keep me waiting here forever. All these impermanent things, where the beauty's never aging, but the worthlessness enraging, and then we always stand alone when we're together. And why keep hanging on to things that never stay? Things that just keep stringing us along from day to day. All these impermanent things, well, they're trying to convince me, baptize my soul and rinse me, purge my mind of honesty and fire. All these impermanent things, well, they all add up to zero, make believe that they're my heroes, then they fill my mind with doubt and false desires. And why keep hanging on to things that never stay? Things that just keep stringing us along from day to day. Hey, yeah.
So beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nadine.
So, I just want to tell everyone that this is a beautiful book, Suspended by No String. It's a great way to reconnect yourself with your own deeper self, and something that I think we all need all the time, and especially right now.
Thank you.
And thank you, Peter, so much for joining me today.